Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Silverspook, and this is the Silverspook live stream. Before I forget, don't forget to check out Neofeud if you have been waiting for that. It is currently on sale. It is on Steam and on itch.io, and it does support everything that we do here at the Silverspook Hui / cooperative / housing cooperative / political action. And don't forget that you can also support us through Patreon, as well as direct donations through the StreamYards link, and liking, subscribing, and doing all the usual sharing and other things that help creators, generally speaking. Anyways, so let's see here. I'm trying something a little bit different. I'm just gonna try to jump straight to the video today, see how that works out. Do a little bit of a shorter video, specifically on the topic as much as I can. Also, I will be later on today having a conversation, an interview of sorts, interview going both ways with Professor Flowers, also known as Lua Borealis. So that's going to be coming up later on today at 2 o'clock our time, which is I believe 5 o'clock Pacific time. So that's going to be coming up later on today. Anyways, so I also have to get off earlier because of that. Anyways, but also today we will be discussing, on top of games being on sale, there we go. So today we'll be discussing the alienization of indigenous feats. Let's talk about crediting extraterrestrial visitors with accomplishments of Africa, Turtle Island, Asia, and the Pacific, which is where I'm from as a native Hawaiian. And so specifically talking about that in the context of Stargate. This is an ad from the 90s dealing with Stargate that will take you a million light years from home. So I can get a picture of that, so you can just see that. Yeah, there you go. You can see that. Full disclosure, I've been kind of researching a lot of the. I'm always researching history and the future and science fiction, generally speaking, because I'm making science fiction adventure games and cyberpunk science fiction video games and other products at the Silverspook Cooperative, because I'm basically the main game developer part of our, Hui, or that's a Hawaiian word that means, cooperative business, like Huawei, as opposed to, Amazon, which is a non-cooperative business. Again, that speaking of indigenous technologies, indigenous peoples invented that. And the West has not caught up to the cooperative model that we invented thousands of years ago, actually. Anyways, so Stargate is a movie from the 90s, and it became a series. It became a TV series in the mid 90s that is basically, let's get a quick little synopsis about what this is. Just so you get an idea of what we're talking about. So in modern day Egypt, Professor Daniel Jackson, James Spader, teams up with retired Army Colonel Jack O'Neill, Kurt Russell, to unlock the code of an interstellar gateway to an ancient Egypt-like world. They arrive on a planet ruled by the despotic Ra. Remember that word, despotic. It's gonna come in handy later, and it's gonna be important. Who holds the key to the Earth travelers' safe return? Now, in order to escape from their intergalactic purgatory, Jackson and O'Neill must convince the planet's people that the despotic Ra must be overthrown. If you think about, there's a lot of things happening in that description, especially if you think about that from 2022 and the actions of certain North Atlantic organizations in Africa. The people must overthrow their despotic leader, right? Just think about that. Anyway, we'll come back to that though. That's another part of what's happening in this is not just a critique specifically of Stargate. This is just everywhere. This is everywhere in Western science fiction. So coming back to alienization, so basically, just to kind of give you a quick rundown. So Kurt Russell is the colonel, right? Kurt Russell is a colonel who is traversing with the scientist, right, through this gate. And very importantly, like the gate itself, let me see if I can find that gate. So the gate itself is discovered in ancient Egypt, right? And it jumps from time from like thousands of years BC to the early 1900s when the gate is first discovered, right? And the gate is, let me see if I can find that. So in the initial discovery of the gate, this came around the same time as Waterworld as well. There's a really big Egypt kick in this time. There's always an Egypt kick, that's part of the deep history, and that's part of the history of colonization, and which is another way to say horrific treatment and plunder, killing, and subhumanization of indigenous peoples of the world, including especially the people of Africa in this case, right? And so the gate is discovered. All right, let me see this. Yeah, here. This is one of the articles that they write about in Stargate, right? From the 1900s, or early 20th century, like 19, and they have this discovery, right? Mystery object discovered in Giza, gateway of the gods. Right? The archaeologists, like Indiana Jones. Indiana Jones is actually part of this entire complex as well. Tomb Raider is all part of this. Where they discover this ancient structure, like a pyramid, like when they discovered pyramids, when they discovered mummies, when they discovered the Sphinx, when they discovered right? When they discovered by day I mean people from Europe, of course, visiting. Let's be nice about it. Visiting Africa, and they're describing these Taurus, mysterious, disc-like object that the material that's made out of is like some kind of non-earthly, anomalous, unknown to modern Western science sort of a substance, right? And the words that are inscribed around the hieroglyphics or the glyphs or they're not sure what it is, but the writings that are inscribed around the circle of this gate, right? I mean, much like when there is a investigation of the pyramids, the writings that were inscribed, right? They couldn't understand it. They're trying to figure out with linguists, right? That's where James Spader's character comes in. They're trying to figure out what were these ancient people saying, what were they doing, and we're talking about this from a Euro point of view, which kind of there's this thing that happens, right, when we're coming from that point of view, which is that if there was, let's say, and I'm not speaking specifically about the pyramids and ancient Egypt, but just generally, Sumeria. I can tell you about Hawaii. This is the case, but when Western colonizers, let's call that murderers, enslavers, and multi-$100 trillion plunderers and racist subhumanizers of African, Asian, Americas or Turtle Island and Pacific peoples, when those people are studying, right, the languages and the artifacts and the buildings and the hieroglyphs and the petroglyphs and the writings, and the cultures, right, there is a lot of deliberate forgetting, right? If there is any memory in the peoples of Africa, when they first arrive, right? When the British arrive with the Dutch and the Americans together, right? Slaughter, millions upon millions of the people, right? Enslave them, bring them and use them for forced labor, like in the Congo, right? If there is any remembering in that culture, right, when the Europeans arrive to pillage and to crush and continue to extract resources, right? Like I just said in Libya, in this last decade, which I mean everywhere in Africa. If there is any remembering of that history in the local, in the natives, right? So when indigeneity is only makes sense in terms of colonization, right? Which is mass. Let's call it colonization. Sounds too sanitized, right? Because these are space colonies, right? Mass murder, pillaging, raping, and plunder and theft, and destruction and diseducation. That's what colonization actually means, and erasing of history. So when you arrive, if there's any memory, the memories are erased, right? The people are forced, diseducated, like my people, the Native Hawaiians, right? We had 98% literacy rate. We had the most advanced, literally. I mean, I'm going to come back to Hawaii again. I often do, but we had the most technologically advanced, the most literate, the most economically equal in terms of socio-political technology. Hui, I would argue, is a socio-political technology. It's called working together for mutual benefit to maximize productivity. It both maximizes productivity, minimizes interpersonal and ethnic strife, and also works great for the environment. It's a technology, right? That only now in 2022, Western-centric neuroscience is starting to acknowledge to deal with climate change. Just to deal with climate change alone, we have to get to what they have described, not very correctly, as socialism, communism, anarchism. These are concepts that are describing indigenous socio-political technologies and economic organizational technologies. So there's a deliberate forgetting, right, of who we were, Native Hawaiians. There was a deliberate forgetting, if there was any remembering of what these symbols meant. When the British arrive, when the people in their safari, pants and their guns and their archaeologists, right, and their Lara Crofts and their Indiana Jones, and their James Spaders, right, when they arrive to study, right, if the people in Africa remember, that's why to smash the noses off of all of the figures is because they had African black noses, and in an age in which racist phrenology is about eugenically describing all great advanced successes as economic, political, technological, civilizational successes, right, are like in the white man's burden, right? The successes of the society, right? Let me get the high resolution so you can see, right? You remember this image of the white man's burden, right? Where all of the successes of society are tied to your race, right? That was the justification for this entire era. So if there are any great pyramids, if there is any advanced irrigation system, technological feats like huge cities that are integrated, in way, if there is, wheels and or potentially teleportation technology, science fictional, near infinite clean energy technologies, whatever there was, right? All of that has to be erased and destroyed to justify, right, the process of extraction, the attempts to justify in the minds of the masses of British, American, French, Spanish, and the rest of the world, the killing, enslavement, and plunder of those people, right? So that's why the noses have to be smashed off, because no African degenerate people could ever invent these technologies. It has to be aliens. That's why they still put out these shows, right, called Ancient Aliens, right? It's a very popular show, right? It's you can currently go on Peacock, you can go on Gaia, you can go on Play History, and you can watch yourself Ancient Aliens, right? You know, the pyramids, right? It always comes back to the pyramids, because the pyramids were one of the most significant, massive feats of construction that were like undeniable, that were millennia old, you know, in the African region, you know, Sphinx, and there were similar, you know, construction in, you know, Turtle Island or North Central South America. Cahokia is one of these places in North Turtle Island, or Abiyala or Hanuna, which is the indigenous names for that. Hawaii had like Great Heiau. There's actually a description of, you know, a lot of the temples, and Heiau is in Hawaiian, that is a very spiritually significant place, but it's a large feat of construction. And many of these were built in one night. Like 20,000 plus people would come together. They would hui together, work together, and usually in the night, because it's easier and cooler to work. And they would construct one of these massive structures in one night. And so Ancient Aliens, but it goes back to these structures, and they're always stone. There's actually a reason why. You know, there are multiple reasons why Masonic construction with stone, stone, concrete, you know, hard physical structures are for multiple reasons. One of them is, you know, when you're in a constant violence like in Europe, you have to stop the invaders with stone, but also it gives a sense of permanence to your claims to a territory. Anyway, but that's a longer discussion. That's not really on the topic. But anyways, so back to Stargate. So when you look at, if there is any knowledge in the African people of what their history is, that is destroyed when colonizers show up, because that is not conducive, right? That is not conducive to plunder, right? Like, for example, right? Like, just as an example, when the Spanish arrive in South America, whatever knowledge of the Incan structures, whatever advanced societal technologies, whatever the ecological coexistence with, by leaving grains of rice to fall, when you go back, don't take all the rice, because the next year the automatic spilling of the rice will allow for a regeneration with minimal damage to the local ecology, so you have enough rice each year, right? Don't take all the maple syrup. When I was talking with my partner Holly's from so-called Canada, where Canadians, the Euro Canadians, were wanted to chop every maple tree down and convert. If you chop a maple tree down, you can get 10 times the maple syrup rather than simply slowly harvesting the sap from the tree, right? But the problem is, if you cut all the maple trees down, then within 1 to 5 to 10 years, you don't have any maple trees left, right? And that's where the Euro and Euro colonizer capitalist world is, right? And nothing is left. And the environment's dying, and the climate change is going through the roof. But so this plunder, right? This process of plunder, and also it's not just plunder; it's ecological annihilation, right? To justify that, you need to, again, coming back to the title, to justify that, you need to alienize the successes of the indigenous. That means non-indigenous, and again, in this context, what does indigenous mean? It means non-mass murdering, mass enslaving, mass subjugating, exploiting, ecology annihilating, plundering, right? People. That's what it means. Indigenous just means to just be a normal, cooperating people, actually. That's what it means. And I would argue, that's part of why they remain indigenous for 10,000 years. Like, for example, the Wet'suwet'en, the Anishinaabe, the Sioux, the Lakota. Not with zero interpersonal and inter-ethnic strife, necessarily, right? Not with zero crises, right? But very, very, like 1,000th or less the amount, because the societies are operating in mostly peaceful cooperation from the commanding heights, right? That's how they're operating, which allows them, right, to coexist with the Wet'suwet'en language, with the Lakota language, with the Blackfoot language, with the Iroquois language and culture and history for thousands of years in perpetuity. You know, for not since time, you know, nobody ever was in one place forever. There's always this migration, people move, people change, but no, you know, the languages that they were spoken, you know, 1,000 years ago might be different. The Iroquois language 1,000 years ago might be different from 500 years ago, right? But the Iroquois didn't wipe the Blackfoot out. The Blackfoot didn't wipe them out, right? The Wet'suwet'en didn't wipe the Anishinaabe out. The Anishinaabe didn't subjugate the Wet'suwet'en, force them to speak their language, right? Force them to practice their culture, make them practice their religion, right? Make the Wet'suwet'en be subservient, plunder the Wet'suwet'en's land, enslave the Wet'suwet'en. That's why, I mean, you know, if you look at places, you can do a kind of historical and linguistic forensic examination, you know, and you can see it in the language in a lot of ways, and you can see it in the history as well. And for that, you have to alienize and you have to erase those successes, because that coexistence and that ecological coexistence, that is itself a success already, right? You know, and I go back, a lot of this goes back to the Roman conquerors, but that broke the peaceful coexistence and produced mass violence, disinformation, and imperial culture in Britain, France, the regions of Britain, France, and Spain today. But anyway, but all that has to be erased. The successes have to be erased, right? Whether that's ecological coexistence in Turtle Island, whether that is construction of massive ziggurats and multi-billion-ton stone structures in Egypt, whether that is the successes of universal healthcare, world's highest literacy rate, and invention of submarines before Europe in Hawaii, right? You have to erase. I can tell you for a fact that the United States, after USS Boston military illegal invasion and occupation of Hawaii, wrote down in their territorial United States government of Hawaii their internal instructions to the departments of education, to the museums, to the government officials, was to obliterate history, obliterate Hawaiian history. They actually wrote that down. So, and then that's what they did. That's why I don't when I go through this threads, right, which I often do, right, about the history of Hawaii, like we'll do that really quickly. Speaking of indigenous erasure, yeah, so I can tell you, I mean, I don't know all the erasures. I don't have all the receipts for what was erased in Africa, in Asia, and Turtle Island, but and there are other people that have more of that. But can tell you in Hawaii, they absolutely erased this history, right? And this is why most people don't know these things, right? Many Americans think that Hawaiians lived in huts prior to colonization, right? Prior to enslavement, prior to subjugation, prior to plunder, right? Which is what they did. They did these things. Indentured servitude. Mr. Dole Pineapple, Bob and Sanford Dole, U.S. collaborators who, backed the U.S. overthrow of our sovereign elected democratic government, called Hawaiians the perfect servants. That's what they called people in Hawaii, in Dole Pineapple ads. So that was all. Some people, there's a discussion of whether Hawaii was colonized or not. I mean, what happened in the 1890s it was a people that were coexisting, and then there's a people that were coming in from externally and destroyed, enslaved, or enslaved as best as you could in the 20th century without looking like you were enslaving people. Plundered, absolutely plundered. We're poorer than we've ever been, and subjugated the people. So that did happen. Anyway, many Americans think that Hawaiians lived in huts prior to colonization. The U.S. actually deindustrialized Hawaii. Before 1898, we already had electricity, mass transit, and railroads. Iolani Palace had electric lights before the White House, right? So, and again, this is in case you don't know, because a lot of people from the United States, they don't know this history because it has In this case, I mean, they didn't alienize Hawaii's successes. They simply erased all of Hawaii's successes, right? The ones that are harder to erase, like giant structures, have to be alienized in order to erase them. Because you can't. The pyramids are still there. You know, the Sphinx is still there. These other, you know, the parts of Turtle Island have all of these cities. The Moai, in that's the you know the large heads in what's called Easter Island. The local name is Rapa Nui. You know, they have in the museum, in Nairete Museum. Those stone heads are still there. So you know, you have Western Eurocentric science and archaeology and anthropology have to come up with some explanation, right, for these Moai, and so they get alienized. A lot of one technique is alienization. Another is also how did Hawaiians arrive in Hawaii? How did the you know indigenous people of Pacific get from Madagascar to Rapa Nui to Hawaii? All 2/3 of the Earth's surface. How did they travel so far when Europeans were still hugging the coast of Europe and Africa, afraid to venture out because there be dragons, right? There be sea monsters. There be the world's end that you'll fall off of. How could thousands of years ago, again, non-Euro people have advanced navigational technologies? So Thor Heyerdahl made an entire Kon-Tiki is one of those attempts, right? It was an expedition 1947 by a raft across the Pacific, led by Norwegian explorer Thor Heyerdahl, and it was Kon-Tiki was a Euro scientist attempt, Norwegian specifically, to prove that the Pacific indigenous peoples didn't discover anything. People from South America that came across a land bridge, which that's also contested now, right? People from South America, indigenous people, just got lost on a raft, right? And that is that's a direct archaeological scientific attempt to erase the successes of the indigenous people of Hawaii. But anyway, back to this. Okay, but these are the actual receipts that we have of, you know, Honolulu Electric Works. This is the electrical engineers, and also somebody was contesting this. They said when I in this thread, somebody replied, "This just sounds like a lot of Hawaiian. This sounds like some, you know, unhinged Hawaiian person going on a schizoid rant, and there's no information." And other people were like, "Well, you can look this up and just research this," and he's like, you know, "I don't see anything." And it's like, here's a link to the Electrical Engineers International Association that has a archive of all locations, because electricians had to work on all of this, right? And they have an archive of when the White House was electrified, when X and Y, when the Chrysler building was electrified, when, you know, Big Ben and the city of London, right, had electricity, and when, because electrical engineers had to do this stuff. And it's like, well, this is not just some Hawaiian guy ranting. This is like easily researchable. These are publicly available data. Just look it up. I mean, I think there's a lot of data is not as accessible, but that one you can look up, you know. And the West, the people that have committed, again, the mass violence, mass plunder, mass disinformation, have tried to, as best, to hide the history. And a lot of it they have burned, or, you know, it's not easily accessible, right? If you look on CNN, an American history textbook, a French history textbook, a University of, you know, Oxbridge, or even a German university textbook, you might not find a lot of this, right? But it is not inaccessible in the entire body of print and you know, archive knowledge. You can look these things up, you know, which is part of the job of a lot of, you know, people. Adam Kiabe, which is where I got this. Adam Kiabe, if you want to, you know more about this history, Adam Kiabe is the person who is doing that research by going through hundreds of thousands of print publications that Hawaii that the sovereign country of Hawaii put out. Adam's job is, that's why I try to read at least one of these every day, you know, if I can remember to. You know, he has the research on all of these figures historically, right? And figures and successes and technology, but and it's not inaccessible, right? The history is not inaccessible, It is simply made less. It isn't like in the attention economy of 21st century digital, informational Death Stars like the West has, right? On top of their formal school system, as well as the news media and social media system, they push their disinformation into your face, but doesn't make the information, the truth, inaccessible. It just makes it, you have to do a little bit more work to find the truth, right? Like, for example, in this thread, the person that is complaining that I am simply a raving lunatic is basically the words that he was saying. I think the other person was they were either from India or they were from possibly Africa, I believe. They were in Twitter, and they said you can simply look this up. You can look this up, or there's another Chinese person I think commented, you can look this information up. This is not like inaccessible. It's not accessible to you as an American in your public and private textbooks. If you come on a vacation to Waikiki and have hula dancers and your pina colada, they're not going to tell you this stuff. If you go to, even if you go to a illegal U.S. military occupation, that's what it is in Hawaii. If you go to one of the Hawaii state schools, they're not going to tell you this in their textbooks. In history and literature and in the Hawaiiana class, they're not going to tell you this. But that doesn't make this information non-existent. It just makes it harder to discover in colonizer, which it means mass violence, mass plunder, and mass disinforming. They still are. That's very important. Colonization is not over. It continues. That's why you don't know anything about Ukraine if you're in the West, or Libya. So these were but back to, I'm a little off topic. Back to alienization of indigenous feats. Sorry, I'm just gonna change this. So this history is these are indigenous feats is part of what I'm trying to say, right? So this is an indigenous feat of electrifying Hawaii's capital before the White House, of the so-called the so-called most advanced, greatest superpower the West has ever produced, with the Euro colonizers and settler colonizers have produced. Hawaii already had electricity, right? This is an argument. Hawaiians needed America to save it because you all were living in mud huts with no, cars and roads, and we gave you those. False. Hawaiians already had trains that they built themselves, that we built ourselves. We already had, trolleys, and we had advanced cities. And, yes, it's like, because the other thing that person said was Hawaii was already colonized, and so that, it basically seemed like the U.S. and Britain built it. Now, Hawaiians went around the world and read and studied, right? Part of the 98% literacy rate was learning all these technologies and understanding modern, the world's new technologies, right? This is the thing that often is used to justify colonialism. London was so advanced, right? They had sucked all of the capital and knowledge and technology into itself, right? But the thing is, actually, you have to remember that London had a lot of capital, and it had a large empire of the British Empire, right? And it had developed a lot of technology, and it had a lot of knowledge base in London, right? But this was premised, a lot of this is premised, including the paper on which, Mr. Darwin's theories of evolution, the paper on which the electrical engineers of London were writing on, that was actually a Chinese technology. The black powder that the British Empire, right, brought on their gunboats, right, with Lord Elgin, right, to plunder multi-tens of trillions of dollars, right, in exchange for narco and murder in China, killing tens of thousands and subjugating the entire population of China. The black powder was a technology that came from China. That's already a indigenous success, right? And so London, the British did not invent everything that they are saying that they did, and without the capital that they acquired by narco trafficking opium at the barrel of a gun, by going to Africa and plundering their rubber, their tea, their metals, the Spanish in Bolivia with their slave mines, indigenous enslaved people dying and killed and starving in the mines the Spanish are taking the silver from to take to China for fine tea and silk and etc. Without all of the plunder that the Spanish, the British, and the French had visited, they would not have the freed up time and capital based on already pre-existing technologies, right, to advance their own cities, right? And so those technologies, it's not really fair, because these are human technologies, right? It is not fair to credit the British with all of their inventions. It's not fair to credit the Spanish and the French with all of their. I mean, some people did, of course, do work, right? Scientists, and Mr. Babbage and his difference engine, right? Mr. Darwin and his theories that were kind of deeply corrupted, however, right? To justify the extinction of entire peoples, right? A lot of the science is deeply problematic, right? Yes, there are some the electricity and the theory, the industrialization based on the development of the railroad engine, the internal combustion engine, but a lot of the technologies that came out of the science was bogus, like race science, like bloodletting, right? Like a lot of these the biological science was really not that good, and at least whatever was understood was misunderstood, or weaponized, like biological warfare that the West has visited upon indigenous Turtle Island people to wipe them out, right? And they also tried to bring smallpox to Hawaii. So the Hawaiians did read and explore all the technologies, but I would argue these are human technologies. These are not European technologies, because the one justification was the Hawaiians simply the British made Hawaii into a puppet state, so Hawaii was basically a British colony. So these are not Hawaiian successes, these are British successes. Hawaiians were allegiant to the sovereign country of Hawaii was neutral. It was allegiant to Britain, but it was not colonized by Britain. And the technologies were read about, were understood. There was transfer. There was transfer. But then the Hawaiians understood and read, and then they built, and then they advanced beyond what the British were able to produce. Right. So again, these can't be said to be the successes of Hawaii, which again I would argue the successes of Hawaii go beyond what the British were able to produce, because they had a mass transit system, right? That was easily available to the people. There was transit, but Europe didn't really allow a lot of their people to access both literacy, electricity. In Africa, they still don't allow people to access electricity, right? The Euro colonizers to this day. And anyways, and so the mass trolley transit system with the railroads, with the ferry system, allowed people to travel from outer islands like Molokai, Kauai to Oahu. And you could commute. You could take a ferry from your home in Molokai, arrive on Oahu, get onto a easily accessible and affordable train, right? Visit the countryside of Mililani, and you go up into Haleiwa and see the sunset. You could take a trolley in Honolulu town that could get you virtually anywhere, and people would regularly commute from island to island. That surpasses anything that Europe, as far as I know, was able to accomplish, and accomplish at a way that it was very accessible and affordable to 99 or basically all 100% of the population. Britain had a mass uneducated masses of the population that still couldn't read, right? And definitely the places that built their wealth, right, were like Africa, still, and to this day many of them can't read. So Hawaiians built mass transit systems that were more advanced, I would argue, than Britain, in a non-colonial, right, non-mass violence-based, non-mass plunder-based way. I mean, similar to China or Vietnam or Cuba today. They continue to develop without harming vastly other people. They trade, they exchange, but they aren't sucking wealth out of. And so anyway, that itself, I would argue, not being non-colonial and then also advancing, part of the reason why Hawaiians advanced is because of the hui, which is a Hawaiian word that means, right, a cooperative. The indigenous technology of win-win mutual cooperation without bosses, landlords, or emperors is one of the technologies that is a central socio-political technology, which is why Hawaiians advanced so far that they did, right? Which is why the Chinese are where they are, right? Huawei is a hui, actually. Huawei is a cooperative, which is why it is, despite huge international sanctions and attempts to destroy, the kidnapping of Huawei with the vassal, actual puppet state of Canada at behest of the United States imperial powers, right? The DC and the neocons, basically, the Project for a New American Century called up Canada and says, kidnap the CFO of Huawei, and Meng Wanzhou was taken on bogus international law violating, right, grounds into Canadian custody and held there unjustly for years, and then China using international or fighting and using economic leverage to say, hey, this is unacceptable, you need to return her, and in exchange of Canada's actual spies in China, which the West is not as good at maintaining because they lack quantum encryption, which the Chinese have, that is unbreakable by the MI6, the CIA. They're all child's play at this point. So, and the reason why the Chinese have that advanced technology, which is why their spies are having a hard time now, which is why the Western spies are having a hard time now, is because of, I would argue, the win-win cooperative nature, which is another way to say hui, which is another way to say, non-capitalist, non-colonial, right, ways. That's how they have developed the quantum encryption. I was reading some of the new feats of an indigenous civilization in China, and it's amazing. Like, I was like, they have an entire city, Chang'an is the city of the future, that the entire city has quantum encryption, which not only allows this unbreakable encryption, which gonna make it a lot harder for Europe and the United States to be stealing and eavesdropping anywhere in the Belt and Road, really, and not so much the opposite, and also it allows the due to like quantum entanglement effects and like Schrodinger cat like it's weird quantum foam string theory, it's like near string theoretical level of science. They're able to detect any attempt to listen into a conversation between two parties in this city is instantly available. That there's an instant notification, an instant breakaway possibility. So basically, it is a whole nother level of security using quantum technology that is by far surpassing the number of scientific papers put out by China. Is like already like a couple years ago surpassed, and it is accelerating. It is accelerating how rapidly they are technologically advancing. So anyway, so my point there is that like there are multiple layers of bootstrap technologies. The central one is the technology, the socio-political technology. These are not always acknowledged in the West because, well, they're really bad at socio-political technology, right? The socio-political technology of what's described as, anarcho-communism sometimes, or not really anarcho. It's more like socialism. It's more, or sometimes communism, sometimes anti-imperialist, socialist. Under siege by imperial capitalism. Mixed market. But the goal, what they always say is the goal is we want to have. Maybe we'll never get to zero, but we want to have absolute minimum exploitation, unjust hierarchy, right, et cetera, et cetera. That's the goal. It's a stated goal of what's the goal of the Hawaiians as well. But that's always under siege by mass violence, mass plunder, mass disinformation. United States, NATO today, right? The G7, and collaborators with, the Western world. So anyway, so back to this. So these successes, that was a kind of long aside there, but these successes of Hawaii were indigenous successes. Hawaii also had the highest literacy rate in the world, like I bring up often, before Euro colonization, banning of our culture and language, erasure of our history. Just a little aside on that specifically. There was a recent thread that has really blown up. It's really blown up. Since the U.S. I posted since the U.S. banned our Hawaiian language, right? It nearly went extinct, and they banned all print in the indigenous language. You could not print a book, a textbook, a newspaper. They banned the Hawaiian word for newspaper is nupepa. They banned all newspapers, all textbooks, all history books being printed in the Hawaiian language, and also they erased our history in all of their books. And they had the United States illegal territory called it patriotic education, and by patriotic what they meant was forced indoctrination into pro-American exceptionalism, pro-American history and pro-American mindsets in all the children. And you were punished. My parents were physically beaten, and my mom had her knuckles shattered in school for speaking Hawaiian in the late 20th century. So that process of de-Hawaiianization, right, and eradication continued with physical corporal punishment with jail time, right? And dirty lickings is actually a thing that is described. Somebody says you're gonna get dirty lickings. That is physical corporal punishment that was brought in by colonizers, and then the United States and the West taught Hawaiians that that's what you do, is you physically punish your own children for speaking their language. You wash the mouth out with soap. Washing your mouth out with soap was a symbolic. It was a physical punishment for the child, and it was also a symbolic reinforcement that your mouth is dirty when you say Hawaiian words. Like this child was crying to her mommy about she was punished like last month, or 2 months ago in February 2022. She was punished for speaking Hawaiian, and what Hawaiians used to do, and this is the terrible thing. My mom and my dad both have their mouths washed out with soap, but they don't even know why. The reason why is because it was taught by the colonizers, you should do this because it will help your child become civilized and advanced if they clean the Hawaiian out of their mouth, because their mouth is dirty. Taika Waititi was told, are you brown because you roll in shit and mud all day? But this is kind of a thing. Your brownness is dirt, is filth, it's ugliness. Your hair is gnarly and curly, and that afro is ugly. You got to make it nice and white by straightening it, right? So the ugliness and the dirtiness of your skin, the ugliness of your Hawaiian barbaric words has to be washed out with soap. Hawaiians today don't even realize a lot of them. When you do dirty lickings, you're doing the colonizers' work for them. When you corporally punish your children were connected to the kupuna ancestors in the Hawaiian traditional beliefs. This is another thing that Adam Keave, I didn't know this until I found the information from basically rogue educators doing independent research. Hawaiians didn't physically whip, spank with a belt. My grandpa did this. My dad's family, my dad and mom's family, they were physically beaten, punched, beat up, dirty lickings. That's what they call it, dirty lickings. It's a local Hawaiian slang for beating your children. That was brought in by colonization. Washing your mouth out with soap, that was brought in by colonization to wash the Hawaiianness out of your mouth. To wash the indigeneity out of your mouth. Children are still punished in schools. This child was put outside in a public school in Honolulu. You know that place I was just showing you in this place? In the same city that had the highest literacy rate in the world, that had the most advanced mass transit system in the world, that surpassed London, right? Surpassed the West. In the place that invented subaquatic vehicles when Jules Verne was dreaming of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, right? And torpedo-proof vessels. These are the actual truth. While speaking Hawaiian, and they're often bilingual and trilingual. We were bilingual and trilingual. The sovereign country of Hawaii we had black citizens before the U.S. Civil War. In fact, U.S. slaves that stepped onto our soil were considered free. Chinese were full citizens as the U.S. chained them up to build railroads in the West Coast with temporal lynching of Asians. This is a former black slave in the United States that became a free person in Hawaii. Moses Allen was his name. And this is not me just being a lunatic and quote unquote ranting and spouting off nonsense. You can look this, if you don't believe what I'm saying, you can go look these things up. It's going to take a little bit of effort and energy, but that's The ability to take effort and energy to educate yourself is an indigenous technology that the United States, Britain, Spain, and the colonizer world have not figured out how to do. They don't do independent research. They read RT, the New York Times bestseller list, and then repeat the lies. Believing that corporate media, their imperial, capitalist, racist state of the United States and Britain's public, private, and charter school systems that they all fund and operate are giving them good information. They don't, but independent education and actual in the Western left, what they call dialectical thinking, is a technology that's not actually practiced. You know, so it's indigenous researchers that are doing this research. You know, yes, there's an incentive and impetus for indigenous peoples to do this because we're not going to get the truth about ourselves from the Western education and informational systems. But, you know, in the long run, it's in everyone's interest. But as I was saying, in this place that had, you know, again, more advanced technology than the West, that had highest literacy rate on the planet Earth, right? By the admittance of the Europeans, that where Hawaiians presented books of law, newspapers, agricultural products, Bibles, textbooks, other examples of civilized accomplishments. European visitors to the Paris Exposition were for the most part ruled by monarchs. Only their highborn were privy to excellent educations. So again, Britain, the United States, Spain, France, most of their people were not privy to excellent educations. Really, if all of British people and Spanish and French people were educated, Britain might have had more advanced cities than they had in the 1800s, right? They might have had rocket technology already. But 90+% of Britain's potential scientists, technologists, engineers, and mathematicians were busy, you know, serving the tea of the Queen of England, who demanded she be served, who were working for terrible wages in oppressive capitalist, you know, London textile factories, to make unnecessary levels of aristocrat, you know, couturier and, you know, haute couture fancy clothes, right? Like they wear in Our Flag Means Death, all the silk that they stole from China, by the way, because they couldn't manufacture goods at that level. So all of the people's energy is being wasted on a tiny minority of people's exorbitant privilege, wealth, houses, mansions, palaces, castles, boats, gold, jewelry, luxury 76 layer cake, Versailles, pageantry, and, you know, all of that wasted energy could have been advancing civilization and housing and feeding and clothing the people of Britain, which they failed to do, right? And then also, not only feeding, housing, and clothing, but all the people together, working together, making more advanced technology. But Britain, despite its trillions of dollars stolen from Africa, Asia, the Pacific, and Turtle Island, trillions of dollars of wealth, right? Stolen or narco-trafficked for, right? Still, really, with that level, if Hawaiians had multi-tens of trillions of dollars, we would have already been in space in the 1800s, probably. You know, with that level of enabling of actual productive technology and economical advancement, Hawaiians and the Chinese would have been in space in the 1800s. But so anyway, so that's just to say that, like, this idea that, oh, they were so advanced in London, oh, the U.S. was so magically gaining in technology, oh, the you know, Paris and, you know, and these amazing cities, they would have been much more amazing if they weren't wasting all of that money they stole on the exorbitant privilege of the richest blooded murderers, like the Queen of England. And like, she still is. She has a $400 million diamond in her crown jewels that she stole from South Africa. You know, so if they weren't still trying to steal the world's wealth to this day by keeping Libya de-developed and stopping them from, and Libya was trying to do an indigenous advanced socio-political technological advancement. It's called universal healthcare, like Hawaiians had. It was called universal education, like Hawaiians had. And then NATO, all of Europe, and the United States collaborated to destroy Libya, so they could continue to plunder for exorbitant privilege of the 1% and their plutocrats and their bourgeois labor aristocracy that is the bought off top percentage of white people in their countries, exorbitant privileges. Okay, so anyway, so my point is that the socio-political technology of working together is actually what cooperatively working together without exorbitant privilege for feudal lords, aristocrats, masters in a slave system, CEO, multi-hundred billionaires in a capitalist system. With these all work together. Kings and queens and monarchs in a feudalist system. Imperial plunderers in a colonial system. And so not having those is what allowed Hawaii to advance so fast. Anyway, I feel like I've gone over this long enough. And so that these technologies and these successes, right, are what, in that same place that is now having the language banned, and the people told they were backwards and savage and barbaric, that's the same place that had these amazing advancements. So the fact we had 30,000 plus, and in the 1980s, less than 100 kids, by estimates, it was about 2 to 3, maybe 5 dozen kids speaking Hawaiian. It was being annihilated. The Hawaiian language was almost extinct. It was actually called the university system, the Western academic system. Linguists describe Hawaiian as an extinct language like Sumerian, or ancient Egyptian. Coming back to Stargate. Speaking of, ancient aliens. Hawaiian was almost made extinct, like the ancient peoples of Africa who could interpret and speak in the hieroglyphic symbols in this tablet here, right? And and so the academics like Mr. Kontiki from Norway, right? Western academics were already coming up with their own stories about what the ancient Hawaiians were, who they were, what they were doing, making entire archaeological, right? Let me go back to Kontiki. Making entire archaeological, anthropological careers, right? High-paying, PhD in anthropology, sociology, biology, right? History. People had. This is where a lot of academia in the West is deeply complicit in the process of colonization, because he was making a career justifying the continued plunder and subjugation of the Hawaiian people by trying to prove that Hawaiians were so backward, and all the indigenous peoples of the world were so backward, all the non-white peoples of the world were so backward, they just got lost and arrived on these islands. That's literally what he was trying to prove. And there's a movie about it, and it's but what it's really the under the meta narrative that it's trying to tell, the story that it's trying to reinforce, right? The consent manufacturing and an indoctrination it is trying to impart into the masses of the world is that we, the colonizers of Europe, we, the mass violence, mass enslavers, mass plunderers, deserved everything because we were better people. We were more technologically, economically, socially, etc., advanced. Those people were backward. They were savage. They were the white man's burden. We deserve all of the world. We deserved Africa. We deserved the Americas. We deserved all that 450 trillion. There's a lot at stake here. Academia, anthropology, sociology, and history in the university systems of the US, of Europe, of all the Western countries aligned with the United States, and Japan as well, as long as they continue to align with the United States. There is $450 trillion. That's how much is estimated total taken from the global south to the global north over the last couple centuries. $450 trillion that's at stake. This is not a game, actually. It's never been a game. This is people's lives. This is history. But there is a lot of specific amounts of money and power is at stake when it comes to describing this past. That's why it's very hard to really break ground when it comes to telling these kind of truths, because it is deeply damaged. That's why nobody will ever teach you this stuff I'm trying to tell you in this thread. That's why I have to, like Adam, be a rogue educator, a rogue truth teller as an indigenous Hawaiian in the Western capitalist imperialist colonizer world, because their continued plunder, it's not over. 90% of the uranium from Niger going to power French lights. Belgium is still profiting from the Congo. France is, U.S., France, all of Europe, Germany, France, Britain, Spain, all plundering still Africa, still to this day. As long as they work with the United States, they are all plundering this entire earth. Every single one of them, every NATO country, all the ones that vote not to stop Nazism and racism and xenophobia in the UN, all the ones that continue to participate. They cannot allow people to understand this truth, because this is not just true in Hawaii. This is true everywhere. Hawaii is just like an example that I know specifically because of my own research. And I encourage everybody to do their own independent research. Don't research it in formal Western colonizer written text, even the university system, because they are complicit in this. University of Hawaii has a lot of professors that have made $2 million in their career, making 6 figures a year at the University of Hawaii, never teaching this stuff. You know how I know that? Because I went to the University of Hawaii. So you have to really do original research from original sources, or find people that have done that to get this information in the West. Now, if you're in China, you're in Vietnam, you're Cuba, and Laos, you're in a socialist indigenous country like that, you know, it's going to be a lot easier, right? Like Luna Oi, you know, it's why like they're a lot smarter there, because they don't have K to 12 plus 8 years of disinformation, and then they have to find some rogue educator in their free time trying to survive in racist capitalism to get a little education. You just get K to 12 education. You get K to 12 actual education, then you get 8 years if you go to 4 to 8 years of college in Vietnam or China. It's all education from all the way up. So they're like, just like, it's like, you know, it's almost it's difficult to comprehend. But again, that's an advanced technology of socio-political, economic, educational technology of living in a cooperative, win-win, peace-based, you know, mutual respect-based society, means all of the people in the society will be far, far more educated, because the people, again, a socialist system in modern Western parlance does not require disinformation, because you are not plundering other people. So you don't give them false information about who they are, history, whether vaccines work, right? Because why would you lie to people? You only lie if you're trying, under a capitalist imperialist system, colonial system, to mass plunder, right? You lie, the lies in Western education have to be there to perpetuate the mass plunder, and also internally of the own population that is under a capitalist structure, right? So internally, you have to lie about COVID-19, and you say that it's going to be just a little cold, and you know, as Senator Loeffler and Burr and the CIA did, that it's going to be as bad or worse than the Spanish flu. So that destroys your population. That destroys your own masses' ability to even understand biological science, which is why the places that have anti-vax, anti-mask, anti-lockdown, these unscientific protests, half the country, like France, Belgium, Germany also had these, you know, US, Canada, because they are governed by mass disinformation. The people don't understand, too many people don't understand the basic health science, and you have millions of deaths, unlike China. So anyways, so you know, all that is, you know, very important to remember when we're thinking about extraterrestrial credit for accomplishments of indigenous peoples, including the indigenous peoples of Africa. But yeah, anyway, thanks everybody for sharing this. This is like the biggest thread I've ever made. This is like sick. I mean, every time I look at this thing, it's gone up. Like, just when I was looking at it on stream, it's gone up by like several hundred. This thread has like 62,000 likes. That's like by far the biggest thread that's ever happened. But the reason why this is getting so well spread, and people are saying things like, you know, if we just look at some of these, right? What are people saying, right? You know, the indigenous people are like, no language deserves to be endangered, right? People are asking questions like, what are natives doing to prevent this? Like, you should know, you know, if there was an education system in the United States, how many millions of people have come to Hawaii, right? Probably 1 billion, right? The people that are sharing this because many of them they don't know. My mother went to high school during a time when the language was banned. My Hawaiian mom doesn't know her own language. It is sad. This shouldn't still be happening, right? See, so Hawaiian people are acknowledging now more publicly this is a thing that happened, right? But a lot of people are like, I'm trying to find somebody who, a lot of people were saying, how do you ban language? I have no idea that the US was doing this, right? How is freedom of speech not protecting Hawaiians, right? I can't believe it. I can't believe it, right? The fact that so many people, especially the people of color from around the world, there are people from China. There's actually a Uyghur that said, "Oh my goodness, this is terrible. I'm from Xinjiang and we have Kazakh. I can speak Uyghur. I can speak Kazakh. Let me see if I can find that one. It's very important for people to know. If you don't know this, this is one of the things that you don't learn because of continued colonization. Somebody crap, where did I put it? I know I saved it somewhere. Oh yeah, Kazakh. It's a Kazakh Uyghur response to this. In Xinjiang, we have no language restriction. I am Kazakh. I can speak Kazakh and Uyghur. I can also write in Kazakh. I live in Xinjiang. How lucky! So this is a Shuren. This is not. I know several other Uyghurs as well. So this is not the only person that has said this. This is again. This was very close to home in the last couple of years because I was talking and listening to some Uyghurs and they're like listening to them speak their own language. I follow this channel, Ituna, who is let's see if I can find that one. Speaking on the language. Let me see if I can find that one. Crap. Might have been on Libya. Because there was a lot of talk about how the Uyghur people are, having their language suppressed. Their people are doing forced labor. They banned their culture, right? They're destroying them. This Ituna. You can listen to. The thing is, like, again, you can do your own independent research. You can go watch Uyghur people on the YouTube channel, like going around their town. They're like harvesting the goat milk because they're in an arid eco-region. It's a desert. It's a desert. Xinjiang is a largely desert region. Ituna speaks in Uyghur, English, and Mandarin in this video. In one of many. Like I usually jump in. I watch one of them like every time one comes out every week or so. And it's like this is in broad daylight. This is, again, like the person saying, "Oh, this is a Hawaiian raving lunatic talking about how Hawaii had electricity before America." That's not possible. There is no way that some small island country could have possibly outdone the United States and Britain and France. That's impossible. You're just a raving lunatic. I mean, you can look up in the history, the archives of the electrical engineers. This is public data. You can look up in the history of the catalogs of the newspapers of Hawaii. It's in English and Hawaiian. This is not made up. This is just not made accessible to you, right? And the Uyghur is like, I'm so grateful I was born in China because in Afghanistan, where the United States has been making war and killing and plundering and killing and lying about the Afghan people for the last decades upon decades, it is terrible. This is from Ituna's review of The Kite Runner, which is about this horrible war. And in Afghanistan, there are large populations of Uyghur people. It's pronounced like Uyghur, not like Uyghur. People say that in the United States because that's part of the racism. It sounds really close to the N-word. So there's a simultaneous racism against, yet so-called care for the human rights of these people. It was very infuriating as a person, right? Watching Uyghur people speak their language and watching the West get upset and call for sanctions and attacks and war and then beating up Chinese people because they're hurting Uyghurs. and they stop Uyghurs from speaking their language, and then you look at what is America doing? What is America doing? America is I lost it. America is banning Hawaiian language, right? There are millions of Uyghur speakers. There was less than 100 children speakers in the 80s. Today we have 30,000 Hawaiians. That is like less than 1% of as a percentage of the people compared to the Uyghur. Every Uyghur person can speak the Uyghur language, right? Every person can speak the Uyghur language. That's Uyghur. As far as I know, I haven't seen any contradicting evidence. You learn Mandarin, but that's all Chinese learn the international trade language. The Federation of 56 active regions language, and you also learn your local language. Everybody has at least 2 languages, right? That's like a thing that you do in a place like in as example in Turtle Island, everyone had 2 languages as well. As far as I was speaking to my indigenous Ojibwe relatives like Dicky and other Anishinaabe relatives, from what I understand, everyone had 2 languages. In Turtle Island, there's a hand language that was the trading language. When you were interacting with people from other, like if Anishinaabe was trading with a Sioux person, or a Lakota was trading with a Blackfoot person, you would have there was a hand-based language, not the sign language that we know today, another language that was for interacting outside of your local community. So you would have your language, your local language, your spoken language, and then you would have another language for the inter-nation interactions. And that's how China has been for thousands of years. Now the West doesn't do that. The colonizers don't do that. They say, you will speak our slaving, murdering colonizer language, and you will be physically beaten for speaking your local language. There can be only one language, and the only language you will speak is our language. And yeah, you can learn multiple languages, but that's reserved for privileged people in our society, because most people don't even have an education, and they certainly don't have a quality one. So anyway, like, let me see how much this thing sprang. I was gonna click on it again. It's gonna be at like 63,000. But anyway, so that one's really blowing up. But the reason why it's blowing up is because people don't have this history and education in the West, because this is an English language service. Basically, most of Twitter is English, right? And people don't have this education. So that's why people that are, oh my God, I didn't know this. If you had an education system that taught you the true history of the world, you wouldn't be finding these things out, right? Most of America has been to Hawaii. Let's be real. Most Americans have taken at least one trip to Hawaii. Certainly the Gen X and Boomer age people have taken at least one trip to Hawaii, if not several. And yet, they don't even know what's right under their nose. Some of them live in Hawaii and they don't even know this. Right? Some Hawaiians live in Hawaii, they don't even know this. That is how terrible Western education actually is. I mean, K-12 and university. If it was, and it has to be terrible, because if it was good, there wouldn't be capitalism, racism, and colonialism anymore in the West. So it has to be massively disinforming and obliterating reality. It has to be fictional history. Economics is science fiction, to quote Michael Hudson in Harvard, Princeton, and Yale, and Oxbridge. It is based on an alternate reality populated by Homo economicus, which has no bearing on how the real world economic, business, and markets operate. That's like from Premier, Richard Wolff can confirm. Economics departments in advanced universities in the West, completely garbage. History departments, sometimes less than useless, because they teach distorted. The way in which the narrative is constructed is very important as well. It's not just like the facts that you plug in. It's the overarching story that you're telling with the dates and the names and the wars and the facts that you're plugging in. That matters as much as the dates and the facts. Is what is, you can take the same data, rearrange it differently, right? Omit certain things. It's like cinema, right? You take the same shot, right? You can take a child with a boot on the head, right? And then you cut the camera so that you only see the boot on the child's head, and then when you pull back the shot a little bit, just by choosing where to put the camera, if the child has his hand inside of the boot and the child is like putting his own boot on his head. One story is this is an authoritarian despotic regime that is crushing children's skulls with the stomping boot of the police state of China or something, right? And you pull back on the shot and it's like, wait, that's just a child playing around with a boot. This is literally how most Western propaganda works. But that's also how history works in the West, is you obliterate. You tell this story of how, look, London had this advanced city, and you leave out the fact that, yeah, but you should have had a way more advanced city plundering the 450 trillion from the world. So you actually kind of suck. You just look at some towers, if you just look at an American, Apollo rocket, you go, wow, that's amazing what you just did there. But like, based on the amount and the access and the population and the access to capital, money, and population, and the access to potentially education, America should have had rockets like decades and decades ago. And actually the Soviet Union, there's communists again, beat them because it's more productive. The only reason why America won is because they had to do sanctions and coordinated military and hybrid warfare against, and they're still doing that against China. So the way that you tell that story, what data and facts you are choosing to leave in and leave out, because people have limited time in their day. They can't read all 700 quadrillion letters of text and every data and every fact and every date and every event in world history for all multi-billions of people that have existed throughout time, right? So you have to choose which story to tell. But the way you tell it, and are you telling the story in the percentage of reality that you're choosing to put in your history book, in your movie, in your New York Times article, in your Atlantic diatribe, right? In your science fictional game, in your Stargate, with the data that you're choosing to put on screen or in the textbook, and in the order in which you're putting it, are you telling a story that is honest to the overarching trajectory of history? Or are you telling a story that is leading people astray for your benefit, for your personal benefit, to the detriment of the masses of the people, especially the colonized and non-white people of the world? And I would argue in the West, whatever you choose to put in is always for the benefit of the most powerful people and countries and races in the room. Not for the benefit of all of the people and the Aina, the ecology on which we exist. Anyway, I'm gonna take a very short break, because I gotta use the restroom really quick. But I'll be right back, and now I'm gonna put the Neofeud trailer for just like about just a minute, and I'll be right back with more discussion on. I'm gonna get back to Stargate because I'm a little off topic. I'm gonna have to stop soon, so I'll be right back.
The Illuminati created us. They wanted to build a god with their own hands, and instead they created us.
Just because I'm made of silicone and aluminium, I must be doing something wrong. That's machine stereotyping, that is.
That's reality, that is. Machines are second-class citizens.
Humans are sentient persons by default, ma'am. They have personhood by heredity.
There are thousands upon thousands of overqualified slum dwellers. You are my peon. Don't you get it?
This wasn't a job. It was always just an excommunication sentence.
We're pawns in a feud bigger than we can imagine. Turn the cogs of the machine before Leviathan grinds you up and swallows you and yours.
We don't get to choose our hand, comrade. Prince, peon, rich, poor, human, robot.
I invented the crux of the royal power, the secret to consciousness, our existence itself, the meaning of life.
I'm the $6 billion baller. Not some troubled youth.
You are my greatest creation of all.
God had to build my own family. I hate your son. I hate your son.
I'm happy to smash all of the crowns and throw the gold shards down to the people. I will be the iconoclast queen.
But who makes you queen anyway? You? You in whose army, princess? You in whose army?
Anyway, so don't forget, Neofeud is, of course, on sale on Steam. So tell all your friends and relatives that might be interested in picking that game up that you can go ahead and grab it on itch and Steam. And it does support everything that we do here at the Silver Spook. Advanced indigenous technology called HUI. It's called Worker Cooperative. But anyways, so now we are going to go back into our Stargate, because I haven't talked about Stargate for the last little while. So what am I going off on that for? So the successes of Hawaii, and like the successes in Africa, and in the case of Stargate, construction of the pyramids, the art, the culture, anything that suggests that there was technology, culture, literature, storytelling, economic cities, economic advancement, cities, international cooperation, the Silk Road, anything that is deemed like could be deemed as successful, quote unquote civilized, advanced in the non-Euro, non-white world, has to be either erased or alienized. And so this is not a critique of the Stargate the movie specifically. This is just, I mean, it is, but this is not Stargate is not the one that started this. This is just part of a system in science fiction historically of doing this, right? Of crediting extraterrestrials, right, with the successes of indigenous people, right? Like, again, the Moai is one of them. Ancient Aliens, Easter Island Mystery, right? This is still happening. This is from February 2020, right? This is a video about the ancient successes of the indigenous Pacific people of Rapa Nui, which is also called Easter Island. I don't know why this video don't want to load. Okay, I don't know, it's not responsive. Okay. I just want the image. Yeah, so Moai statues linked to alien tech, right? This is the Ancient Aliens series. Let me see if I can. Is this one gonna work? You have too many tabs open. I don't know. Okay, so Ancient Moai Aliens. Yeah. So this is the Ancient Aliens, the Easter Island Mystery season. Okay. Every time I try to open it, it seems to not want to do this. Oh, I see. That's why. Okay. So, Ancient Aliens. So the concept is that, like everything else, if indigenous peoples did something amazing, like how did they get all these stones in place? How did they do X and Y and Z? Well, aliens must have come down from space and erected this massive stone heads. Because, right, pseudo-archaeology and the racism. Yeah, this is probably another article about this, right? Pseudo-archaeology and the racism behind ancient aliens. Here's a specific article that's probably dealing with this. I haven't read this before, and I'm just kind of looking around right now. But where exactly the idea of ancient aliens building pyramids began, and why some academics think racism lies at the heart of many extraterrestrial theories. And the ancient site of Hatnuba can't read that. Hatnuba Quarry in eastern Egyptian desert, not far from Fayum. Archaeologists have recently discovered a sled ramp system used to transport alabaster blocks. Postholes and a ramp with stairs on either side indicate that the contraption allowed Egyptian builders to move heavy blocks up and down steep slopes. Inscriptions have now helped archaeologists from Institut Français d'Archéologie Orientale and the University of Liverpool to date the groundbreaking technology to at least the reign of Khufu, who ruled from 2589 to 2566 BCE. Khufu is known as the pharaoh who likely commissioned the building of the Great Pyramid of Giza, discovered discovery and reconstruction of the ramp allows us to better understand ancient construction techniques. So the theory of building of pyramids from aliens comes from since the late 19th century, science fiction writers have imagined Martians and other alien life forms engaged in great feats of extraterrestrial engineering or terrestrial engineering. Earlier alien theories surrounding Atlantis may have spawned fantasies about alien building. This most substantial evidence for non-earthly creatures arrived in the wake of H.G. Wells. Capitalizing on the success of Wells' War of the Worlds, Garrett P. Service, a sci-fi author, penned a quasi-sequel titled Edison's Conquest of Mars. Giants of Mars moved large blocks and built the Great Pyramid. He even noted that the Sphinx had Martian features. You think there's a lot of like images of there's a Sphinx-like feature on Mars, and these kind of ideas. It's a kind of apophenia, or I'm sorry, it's what do you call that? Is it apophenia? Yeah. Well, you're seeing the face of Jesus in your pizza, or Mother Mary inside of your coffee swirl with your cinnamon chai, Spider-Man latte, and it's like, oh, is that the face of Jesus Christ, or is that an ancient alien, giving me a sign to, I don't know, not take my COVID vaccine. Anyways, the Giants of Mars concept, building of the pyramids, and this connection of there could be Martians, right, on Earth, Martians that had come to Earth and constructed these pyramids, right, is part of science fiction works that were published or serialized in newspapers in the late 19th century. Imagine alien invasions fought off by the inventors of the time. Edison was a favorite hero in the science fiction fantasies much later called the Edisonades. Popularization of the theory of alien architects as having a basis in science rather than consisting of only fictional musing can be attributed to Swiss author Erich von Daniken's 1968 publication of Chariots of the Gods, Unsolved Mysteries of the Past. Originally published in German and subsequently translated into English, this was one of the first popularly sold books to suggest that extraterrestrial life, not humans, build structures associated with our ancient civilizations. Carl Sagan, Iosif Shklovsky had already speculated that contact with extraterrestrials might have occurred in the book Intelligent Life in the Universe, but von Daniken took a theory to new levels. The year marks the 50th anniversary of that book's publication of over 65 million books to date. 65 million, it's a lot of books to sell, peddling racist lies. While its ideas might be laughable to most, the creation of doubt is a pernicious and rhetorical agent. The questioning of human building projects in the Chariots of the Gods remains a bedrock for many within the field of pseudo-archaeology. Far from innocuous, these alien theories undermine the agency, archaeology, and intellect of non-European cultures in Africa and South America, as well as native peoples in North America, by erasing their achievements. So again, this is what I've been saying, but this is in a more formal article. I'm gonna save this one. Don't rely on one article. You again do your own independent research. You cross-check this with other data. But the point stands that when you have and again, this is not like why would they do this? There is a very clear reason why science fiction, as a subset of all literature and knowledge in the corpus of Eurocentric world, or Eurocentric Western colonizer world, white world in a lot of ways, has a vested interest. 450 trillion, again, there's a number, there is a price tag on how much this is worth. Continued justification of the backwardness and the lack of, and the savagery and the underdevelopedness and the unworthiness of their own resources, of African, the Central South American, Pacific, and Asian peoples. It is valued at 450 trillion or more. It's actually infinitely valued potentially. Because if we acknowledge that these things are part of a history of great successes of indigenous peoples, and they are at minimum, peoples of Africa are equal to Europeans, actually. And if we actually operate in economic equity, right, that lends credence to continued, of course, there are many vectors to argue for reparations to Africa from Europe, from the global north to the global south generally, right? But one of them is that, is that the Africans had great successes, and not only they didn't end at pyramids either. A lot of African countries were succeeding, and they continued to succeed until colonization. And they were not crushed and destroyed and conquered because they were savage. They were crushed and destroyed because they didn't have advanced military technology and mass violence and mass duplicity, right? In the way that the West did. That's not to say they weren't advanced, it's just to say that they weren't horrible, violent, murderous people like Europeans. Right? And so in that way, it goes from, so that has real implications, right? Also, Libya had universal health care, universal education, and had African Monetary Fund that was going to help Africa develop. And so, and the US and Europe, NATO, that's Europe up there, along with and Canada and Australia, those have more. Canada and Australia, actually no, Canada directly has $30+ billion of mining company and corporate plunder of Africa. Canada is directly implicated in all of this as well. And that destruction of Libya, which wasn't just about Libya. It wasn't just about Libya. It was about the resurgence of Africa with under Gaddafi, not just him, but the whole country of Libya that had universal education, universal health. Here's a fun thing. People ask for, oh my God, tens of millions of people being evicted right now. U.S. has horrible houseless rates. Did you know Libya gave free housing? Every newlywed was gifted a free, large, spacious apartment. Every young family was given a free house in Libya right before the United States and Europe bombed it into the Stone Age and then continued to plunder Africa. And the reason why they did that is because Libya was the leading country in building the liberation of all of Africa, and every European country would stand to lose from the continued plunder of Africa if that were to happen. And the United States, of course, is one of the countries that plunders Africa and bombs Africa. So it was the narrative, right? That this is where the ancient aliens, these are very important stories actually, right? They're very important stories to Euro colonizers because, ancient aliens, and this idea that, the indigenous people, they didn't do anything special, right? Ancient aliens built the pyramids, and the indigenous people, they're all backwards, and Africans were just a bunch of servants of space, super intelligent, type 5 Kardashevian civilizations that were gods, and they're just, all the Africans were just like little slave, and they didn't independently invent the technologies. They were gifted all of these technologies of carving and moving a stone, and the alien just told all the little the Tutankhamun and the Imhotep and the great sun gods came down and were just ordering all of these little slaves around, and the little slaves, they didn't have any education, they didn't have any literacy. They were basically like, they were all just like gorillas moving their bosses stuff around. I know it's all racist, but that's apeification of African people and Hawaiian people as well. That's what we were called the N-word of the Pacific. That's what the United States cartoons and history books call us, and the newspapers call us to back the overthrow. That is part of this process as well. Africa is just full of these pseudo-human, like talking gorillas and talking monkeys, and so we are right to take all of Africa. So that is valuable to Europeans. That's why they continue to vote against NATO. That's why they say things like, Libya is savages throwing spears at each other, and the European NATO don't commit savage acts because we're civilized, right? You don't have civilization. The continued narrative, science fiction is deeply complicit in this. The continued narrative that ancient aliens, not people of Africa, did these feats, and aliens everywhere did all these feats. The difference between China, Africa, the difference between Asia generally, Africa, there's many countries in Africa obviously, but the difference between the peoples in East Asia, Africa, and Turtle Island is the Turtle Island. If you look at a map right? If you look at a map, I just want a map. You look at a map of the world. If you're leaving Europe, the easiest place to get to is Africa, and then after that, United States. Then North Central South America, right? It's a couple thousand miles this way. It's less than 100 miles this way. 1,000 miles to get to South Africa. Several thousand miles to get to South Africa. If you want to get to China, you have to go. You can't really. This area is not very hospitable to Euros, and for good reasons, because they're barbaric. You have to sail all the way around Africa, all the way up around India, because you're not good at international. You're not good at deep ocean navigation like Hawaiians or Pacific people, indigenous people, Samoan and Chukis and Palau and Satawal people. So for Europeans to get to China, it will take you a long time. It's tens of thousands of miles by boat, right, to get to China. I would argue part of the reason why it was Africa and the Americas that were most deeply eradicated, plundered, and colonized is because they're the easiest to get to. That's not the only reason, but that's one of them, right? And China is way over there. If the colonial era had lasted longer for some reason or other due to historical events and trajectory, it's possible that China would have been more subjugated than they were. But they were, as an example, they weren't able to break they did burn the summer palace and pillage it, France and Britain. They did force opium into their bodies. They did take trillions of dollars and burn Chinese cities. But they weren't able to burn every Chinese city, right? And they weren't able to diseducate all of China. They did badly harm them, but they weren't able to diseducate all of China. In Africa, they were more successful at eradicating the history and the education. In Hawaii, they were more successful, but not successful enough, because I'm telling you shit now, right? In Turtle Island, they wiped out. They were not 100% successful at wiping out, diseducating, plundering, and impoverishing the native people of Turtle Island in the United States. But in China, they were least successful, in part because it's a lot harder to get, and it takes longer to get to China, and they have a larger population as well. They were several hundred million at the time, and but it's not because the Europeans decided to be nice to China. They just weren't able to fully roll out colonization there as well as they had in other places. But these places, they're not as different. India is another place that was closer, right? And India was more subjugated. To get from India to China, the mountain here make it very difficult. You have to kind of sail all the way around, right, to get all the way to China. But in India, you have deep subjugation there. You have deep colonization. As an example, India is the largest English-speaking country. When you're speaking English as your native language, you already have been destroyed in a lot of ways, right? Wiping out the language is key to genocide and installing the colonizer's culture and ways into you. And so India speaks English, China speaks Chinese, Mandarin, and your native local tongue. That makes a whole lot of difference. That explains not everything, but that explains some things about why India has half of its population starving to death to this day, has far-right fascist neoliberal collaborators, and China doesn't. China has 1.4 billion people living better than every American, actually, at this point, because they have housing, food, clean water, healthcare, and education. America doesn't have, no one in America has an education. So they're already, China, every Chinese person is more educated. The least educated person in China is still more educated than the average American, by far. I mean, I'm not talking about learning how to read, just read and write and do some math and show up to your McDonald's job or your shilling for Coca-Cola. That's not education. That's important, but that's not education. If you have incorrect information in your brain, you're not educated. Every Chinese person, that's why they're going to advance way faster than every European and American, because there's still disinformation all over these countries. And as long as you're disinformed, even on basic economics, you're going to fall behind advanced indigenous actual civilization. So that's where this even more so, alienization has to continue. To you know, because I would argue part of the process now is saying that China is mysterious, China is alien, China is not, we can't understand China, but at the same time China is stealing our lunch, China is eating our food, China is forced laboring, China is taking our technology, China is eating our lunch in the Central South America, right? But also we can't understand them, we can't learn anything about them, right? There is a mysterious, there is a otherification of China, and a simultaneous, which is part of the demonization for the military-industrial complex, as well as because they're so mysterious and unknowable and alien, we have to be afraid of them, and they have it out, they have it in for us, and all of this together is, I would argue, that's part of the alienization of, you know, an actual advanced indigenous civilization, which China is. 56 separate ethnic existing for centuries and millennia, including Uyghur, Kazakh, you know, Hoa, Hubei, etc. Fujian, Sichuan, Hakka on Taiwan, Hakka and Han on Taiwan, existing for thousands of years, and that has to be erased. That has to be, all of that success, historical and present, has to be erased. Otherwise, what is the West going to do? Get an actual job and actually do work for the first time instead of asking other people to work for free while you collect all of their resources and wealth and productive labor, right? I mean, everyone in the West, not even just the richest, but I mean even the middle, especially particularly the bourgeois, imperialist working class, right? All the social democrats that were actually created by the CIA. Did you know George Orwell also was promoted, along with a lot of H.G. Wells and Orwell himself specifically was promoted by and worked for the CIA to promote the idea, because he hated communism more than Nazism, and he hated communism more than imperialism, and he was promoted in science fiction as well to promote the idea of the despotic, and we're going to come back to that, the despotic, non-Western authoritarian regime, right? So whenever you hear that, right, this goes back to a deep narrative that is in the minds, it's really millennia old, that comes back again and again to justify, for example, continued NATO expansion. We have to stop authoritarian despots in the East, right? The Mongolification of Putin, remember that one, right? Putin, heir to the Mongol Grand Khans, right? Putin, it was in The Economist, right? Where is it? The Asianification, right, of Russia. Where is that one? That was one of these. Yeah. Stalinization of Russia. The tank coming for you. The tanky's coming for you. You know, but a lot of this stuff, you know, you even in the Western left, you can't even really touch a lot of this stuff without people flipping out, because that's how deep the propaganda is, you know. Not to say that there's nothing, again, not to say I don't want to justify any war that's happening. That's not what I'm saying. But the fear coming from the East, right? The fear of the East by the West is very, very, very deep. And so back to the I gotta finish very soon. Stargate, alienization. So we'll talk about the alienization of the indigenous peoples and Stargate itself, right? In the I gotta find my actual video. There it is. Yeah. So in Stargate, you have the symbols that are being read on the actual gate are being read by James Spader, playing a linguist and Egyptologist, right? There's actually a name for studying advanced African civilizations, right? It's an Egyptologist, and he has to decipher the symbols to open the gate of this that is created. Okay, and very importantly, now I gotta close some of these so I can get to what I want to actually get to. The gate is constructed, right? The gate was constructed by Ra. What is Ra in Stargate? Ra is the Goa'uld system lord who personified Egyptian sun god Ra, and the first to discover Tauri. Yeah. So Ra is this character. Where I want to find the Ra in Stargate movie. Yeah. Ra is played by actually the person that's playing Ra, it looks like a non-binary non-white person. I'm not sure who the actor is, but it is Ra is taking the bodies, right, of humans. Ra is the last of a dying alien race, and in order to live forever, the last of a dying alien race and super advanced alien race with intergalactic warp technology, etc. And so Ra has to. This is what Ra looks like when Ra isn't body snatching human bodies, right? So Ra is this ancient alien that has that came to Earth, enslaved humans, and because their bodies were so malleable and easily alterable, Ra chose humans to become immortal by putting his soul, by transporting his consciousness into human bodies like this one, right? And Ra has ruled Earth for thousands of years, had the pyramids built to Ra's, again, right, a despotic, authoritarian glory. Ra, the great pharaoh, Ra enslaves and forces all the humans around to work for him, and forever. Ra can like steal your soul off your head like Shang Tsung kind. Shang Tsung from Mortal Kombat style, fatality. Ra is worshipped. Ra is feared, like in Stargate. There is the village worshiping Ra, right? Prostration, right? Everyone bows down, and if they don't bow down to Ra, Ra gets angry, and then Ra kills. Like these are all the people that when they finally rise up, but with their fists, this is like supporting the freedom fighters in some African country that are U.S. affiliated, far right backed warlords for neoliberal benefit. But let me see if I can find that. Ra worship Stargate ship. If you don't worship Ra, what Ra does in Stargate is Ra sends his ships. The pyramids are actually giant spaceships, right? This is the image of that that are coming down from space, built by ancient aliens, not by people from Africa. See if I can find that image. And if you don't worship Ra, there's like a spaceship. It actually looks like one of the Starcraft spacecraft. But anyways, I'm getting off topic. If you don't worship Ra, Ra will get angry, and Ra will fire with his magical. He has his soldiers have these staves that fire plasmic bursts, and they like can destroy anyone, right? And they don't have any guns, right? These are people living in villages and small. They have a little bit of basket weaving, but they're very backwards, primitive people. It's very racist, super racist. And Ra has rules by having more powerful military technology that he gives to a few chosen leaders, and they beat up and they crack the skulls and they shoot their plasma rays at all of the Egyptian peoples that don't do exactly what he says, try to find that. And so if they really piss Ra off, right? Like let's say that they try to help humans stop Ra from his authoritarian despotism as a non-white authoritarian despot, then Ra, because they're always non-white, because if Ra doesn't help, if Ra is upset so badly because you try to stop him from his rule, Ra will send his warships and blow your entire village up. And that's what he does. At one point, he sends his ships in and shoots random, like X-wing. They're like TIE fighter, X-wing, TIE fighter, same fucking Empire, Western bullshit. But he flies his fighters in and blows up random people in the village. That's the wrath of God, right? And so in Stargate, and so the white humans, the Americans, right? That's played by Kurt Russell. And that's played by Kurt Russell and James Spader, the scientist and the military man. They come and they're studying and they're trying to learn the language and so James Spader's character is deciphering these ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs to figure out how to use the Stargate that allows them to teleport from Earth to this other planet that's in another galaxy, right? And it looks very similar. It's a planet that has a similar atmosphere, terrestrial geological composition, and it also has a similar gravity to Earth. The animals are different, right? So like it's not Earth, right? It's kind of like a camel, but designed by the people who made Dark Crystal. This animal, right, is the mastage, is the beast of burden, or the camel / horse / cow-like creature that they have on this other planet that's very Earth-like in the middle of a desert. Obviously, it's like filmed somewhere in the Sahara probably, but in the like Tatooine is another planet that looks kind of like the deserts of North Africa. So this animal is the one that they use and they ride, but it's very similar. And so the people there, they're basically like they're humans that were transported from Earth to this other planet where Ra continues to rule and tries to stop any uprisings, right? And so and the humans are there to translate the symbols. Humans translate the symbols. The American humans translate the symbols, right? Go through the Stargate, right? They travel through space and time, billions of light years, to this alternate galaxy, arrive in a very similar place, and trying to study and part of this is the U.S. military. This part really is disturbing. Is the U.S. U.S. military in Stargate is tasked with helping the local non-white people in an Africa-like place overthrow their local authoritarian dictator, right? The U.S. military is central to Stargate as well. This is part of American hegemony, and this is where science fiction and Hollywood, of course, is always involved in the storytelling. If the British wrote stories and ruled from Londonite newspapers and almanacs, right, and the BBC to this day in a lot of ways, but the American empire is built on filmic and cinematic and television storytelling. Lying, basically. Narrative control, history control, reality, consent manufacturing, indoctrination, control through the more visceral and the more impactful medium of film and visual animated storytelling. That's why the British are always making fun of American television. That's what Brave New World is a kind of the parent colonizer, murderer, plunderer Britain. Mr. Aldous Huxley taking a tour of the United States and kind of being jealous of how successful American television is indoctrinating masses of its people. This is actually what a lot of David Bowie's, some of his music is actually about. It's actually not really, it's actually inter-imperial, that's actual inter-imperial rivalries, Britain and America. You Americans, you're all with your feelies, your empath, you're all chewing your bubble gum. That's Soma in Brave New World. Being raptured and emotionally and mind controlled by your feelies. That's your television. That's your Leave It to Beavers, right? You're British, you were doing the same thing to your people. You're just doing it slower and with marks of ink and carbon on flattened tree bark. They're called books. That's why the British they're reading all the time, because they're reading about who they used to be and their so-called Great British Empire was never great. It was really terrible, actually. But they read their own bullshit about themselves, like Americans watch their own movie bullshit about themselves. That's what Captain America, Star Spangled Underpants, and Billionaire Philanthropist Arms Dealer Playboy, Iron Man is about America telling stories about how great it used to be. That's why most American TV shows and movies are 1950s, 1980s. Stranger Things is about when America was beating the Soviet Union at the Cold War, because they ain't gonna win any more Cold Wars. Stargate centers the U.S. military that comes through this portal, built by an ancient alien, not found in pyramids that were built by ancient aliens, not by indigenous non-white peoples in Africa. And the U.S. military comes through this portal into space Africa, and it helps, right? It helps the people of this Egypt, this North African country, helps the people, lead the people to revolt against their North African horrible dictator. What is it? What was the United States doing in the mid 1990s, by the way, in Africa? What was happening in the 90s in Africa? Oh, that's right. 5 million people were dying in a Western-backed wars in Africa. What was the U.S. doing? What was Europe and the U.S. all doing in Africa? Forever, but this in the 1990s. Oh, that's right. NATO was also continuing. All the countries of NATO were continuing to plunder and back coups and back overthrows of countries in Africa. What was the U.S. doing? In the Middle East. Oh, that's right. They were having the Neera testimony, right? It was in the same time. Please save my country. I am a young girl, and James Spader goes out with this young, beautiful girl, young, beautiful, exotic, just Aryan enough that people will accept her being the love interest of a white man in the 1990s, but just exotic and dark-haired and dark-eyed enough that it's like believable that she's from Egypt or she's from Africa. That's the main love interest of Stargate. She was a lot like Neera. Neera is like a young, just Western enough, not, to so that people don't go, oh, she's just like some N-word she's a sand N-word. That's what Americans think of most Muslims and brown and black people. But she's like she's attractive, she's well spoken, and she gets on stage in 1990, and you know what she says? She described the atrocities of a desert authoritarian despot in Kuwait specifically. Patients, including premature babies, were dying. Doctors and nurses were fleeing. And she was saying, the soldiers are coming in my country, ruled by Ra, this horrible non-Western capitalist imperialist aligned country, is taking babies from incubators. The soldiers are coming in and they're taking the babies by the dozen. They're throwing them out of the incubators. Children are being killed. Women are being raped. Help my poor country. Help me, save me. America watched this on television. All of America watched this, and everybody went gung-ho into this war, into this imperial, bloodshed and U.S.-backed capitalist, imperialist, racist war, just like all the other wars. With the storytelling that came from a television set, to the benefit of the military-industrial complex, obviously selling the weapons, the guns, the bombs, the tanks, and the aircraft that would blow Iraq to the smithereens. Iraq also a very place that has historically been the place of great civilizations. And Richard Medhurst is always talking, which Syria, Iraq, these were the cradle of civilizations on Earth. Mesopotamia, that region, that whole entire region, had a lot of great architecture, great literature, great sculpture, great poetry. I mean, similar to the great works in China and also parts of Africa that we don't know about because they've all been obliterated, right? And on the basis of if the U.S. doesn't come to this non-white country in the desert and save us, authoritarian despotic rulers will kill all our children and keep us subjugated and enslaved. And how did Europe and America treat Africa, by the way? Let me just, Anyway, right? It's again, you're projecting onto the people there and their horrible despotic leader, right? Their Raz, all of the violence, the enslavement, the killing. Because again, let's jump back to Stargate, right? Right? Ra kills and oppresses all the people. He's shooting missiles randomly into the people just asking to be treated a little more humanely, right? People are, this one pissed me off a little when I was watching. People in in Stargate, the indigenous, what is the girl's name? I can't find it. Let me see if I can find it. Spader, wait, girl from Stargate. This one. Yeah. Share, right? She has like a Egyptianized, share. An Abydonian woman who wife to Dr. Daniel Jackson, as well as the daughter of Kasup, the sister of Skara. So this character, this is the one that she's Euro enough to be accessible to Americans who are super racist. Obviously, Westerners are super racist. But she's She has a curly hair. She has like, she's a little olive. She's been to California beaches enough to get a tan. Curly hair. She is the love interest of James Spader, but she is expressing how he's trying to talk to her. He's trying to draw writing and symbols. They are banned from writing. They are banned from becoming literate. Right? They are banned from becoming educated. By who? By the despotic authoritarian dictatorship of their non-white country, right? Who actually, let me ask you again, who actually stopped people from becoming literate? Who banned language? Because that's what they do. They banned the people, right? Ra bans the people from learning and writing their language. Who actually bans languages though? Right? Is it the leaders of non-white countries against the U.S. imperial and Western imperial interests? Or is it the colonizers themselves? Is it Europeans? Is it the British coming into Africa and leaving 90%, 99% diseducated people? Is it the United States actually that comes to Hawaii, right? And takes the most literate country on earth, right? And turns them into the most illiterate people in the United States, which is not very literate, right? Who actually perpetuates the so-called crimes that the fiction, the non-fiction, and the fiction and the science fiction is projecting? Is it the leaders of Egypt, of Libya, of Burkina Faso, of Senegal? Is it their local leaders? And if it is their local leaders, is it the leaders that are authentically having the interests of the people of Africa in mind, or is it the leaders that the United States is putting in place as actual puppets? Right? Who is it that is banning languages? Right? Who is it that is stopping the successes? Right? Look at this. Speaking about this is where authoritarian despotic regimes comes into play. Right? Who is it that projects the Hawaiian elected leader as a horrible authoritarian despotic king, enslaving his poor little half-naked Hawaiian, the poor little slave people, like poor little Uyghurs, like poor little African people under Ra, like poor little Egyptians, like poor little Naira. Oh my God, so despotic. Much slavery. So many incubator babies. The number of babies that are thrown out of incubators was like incomprehensible for the population at the time. Who projects in their print? This is American print, by the way, in the 1900s, 1800s. I'm sorry. And then later in the television. Oh shit, it's 1:20. I gotta leave. So anyway, you understand what I'm trying to say here? Science fiction, but everything is complicit in it. It's not just Stargate. I'm just saying this. You can watch the movie and you can enjoy it, and then you come back and you look at it and you have to understand what is the meta narrative? What is the concept that's being manufactured? What are you being indoctrinated to believe? Not in the story, in the background world, in the implied reality, in the seemingly extraneous details. That's where the real story is being told. You know? So, and so, you know, finally, so the U.S. military leads the people. Colonel, you know, Kurt Russell and his military friends lead the people of Space Africa to overthrow their despotic, authoritarian leader, which is what the United States was doing. It's always been doing this. It's what the West has always been doing, especially the United States, though. Backing and funding through the NED, obviously, right? The National Endowment for Democracy, backing and funding far-right and U.S. imperialist, capitalist, neoliberal friendly color revolutions to rise up, dispose of their Gaddafi, dispose of their socialist, anti-imperialist, cooperative, desiring peace civilizations, right? Like Libya, and the United States military is leading them to freedom. But that's the reality: is the U.S. and the U.S. military is leading them to destruction. They're the ones that are putting in the regimes through regime change that is destroying them. So, but that is part of Stargate. It has to be, because it's the 1990s. They don't want to let you make a movie in the 1990s or any time really, but certainly not in the 90s. In the beginning of the end of the history and end of Cold War, right? The U.S. is the ruling dictator and Western capitalist liberal democracy is the greatest and only system forever. And so this movie, like every movie, is full of this stuff. So you can watch. I watched the movie and you enjoy it. I know I think Big T was saying, oh, I have trouble. I'm always calling out things when we're watching movies, so people like have frustrating. Sometimes they get frustrated watching movies with me since I've been watching the Silver Spook streams. But you can watch the movies and enjoy them, but you have to also we have to recognize that the movies are part of the Death Star satellites. The most important weapon in the actual empire is informational and knowledge and narrative control. That's like the U.S. Navy's. The Pentagon literally says that as well. That's their most important war. Information and hybrid war. That's where it's at. The other war, specific weapons, is not as important. Certainly not now. So when you are watching and reading anything, you are engaged, whether you like it or not. Inside of your mind is being fought a war as you are consuming it, and you have to like, you can like watch it and then go like have a good time, because people have to like unwind and kick back and enjoy movies and games and films and TV and writing and TTRPGs and all that fun stuff and point and click adventure games like Neofeud. You have to do that because you have to, otherwise you're gonna like not be able to survive capitalism maybe. But also you have to realize that there are other things happening. There is consent being manufactured in your brain while you're being entertained. And you know, I make that point all the time, so I'll stop there because I gotta go. Anyways, I'm not, you know, I do like Stargate. I'm like, Stargate is inspiring a lot of work on Neofeud too. So you know, but I'm retelling the story. Neofeud 1 is about retelling the story from an indigenous left colonized person's perspective about cyberpunk. Like, hey, maybe you all don't need to free your singularity. You're not going to get singularity saviors, and you're not going to get Terminator overlords. Maybe you are the despotic authoritarian regime that we need to fear. By you, I mean, you know, imperialist, capitalist, racist systems, and you know, and you know, the robots. Maybe they'll just be normal humans, like the brown and black and non-white people and Asian people that you subjugated. You know, and maybe you should like be nicer to your descendants that you will create in, you know, synthetic artificial consciousnesses and neural nets. Maybe you should be nicer to people, you know, like try being nice to people, you know. And that's the point of Neofeud. But Neofeud 2 is like, maybe aliens, maybe indigenous people like were greatly successful, you know, and maybe aliens didn't build the pyramids, and maybe like if there are aliens, maybe they're indigenous aliens and they don't want to come kill you, and they do actually come in peace, but you come in violence. You ever thought about that? And maybe they are more advanced than you, and you will never learn their technologies because they're not going to give you technologies if you're going to come back and blow them up. And by you, I don't mean humanity. I mean Western, capitalist, imperialist, racist, NATO-led civilization. You know, when I say you, because there's a lot of people that were doing pretty good. So that's what we're dealing with. Anyways, that's the end of the stream because I gotta go. I gotta do a thing very soon. Actually in like 20 minutes. So don't forget, I'm gonna do this real fast. Don't forget, you can grab Neofeud on Steam and on itch.io. If you have a second, if you have a second to leave a very short review, this game and the sequel is dealing with everything I'm talking about. There are Stargates in Neofeud 2 as well, but they're like constructed by indigenous people and they operate by, and they're more advanced than Ra in Stargate. And Ra is not an authoritarian despot. The super advanced indigenous aliens coexist with like countless galaxies and the 26 dimensional universe hoppers. They're not mean dickheads. The dickheads are the U.S. military helping people out in space. Neofeud 2 is supported by the sales of Neofeud 1. So if you have a second to leave a very short review, please consider doing that. Also, you can get Neofeud on Steam and itch.io. I'm just going to jump through this real fast. You can follow us at Mastodon, at Silverspoon Games, at Octodon.social for my personal takes on stuff, and on a non-capitalist federated open source social media platform similar to Twitter but without the military industrial complex, Pentagon, DC, and think tanks and the Silicon Valley magnates telling you what you can see and what you cannot see. However, while we have access still to the Death Star satellites, you can follow us at Silverspoon Guy for my personal takes. You can also follow Silverspoon Games. Silverspoon Games you can follow for the games related stuff like Neofeud 2. Like this is a scene from Neofeud 2 as well. You can also follow Terminus C, Terminus Cyberstar. I'm gonna get a build for this game very soon. Oh, here's some brand new stuff. There's lots of really cool new material. Grand Theft Ash. I'm the lead content writer and lead writer and content designer on this game. Grand Theft Astro shows up in Neofeud 2. The Neofeud and Terminus worlds are interconnected, by the way. So they're in the same universe. So that's why you're seeing, Bazon Corp. You've got Riot 51. All this stuff. I'm really happy to see all this stuff. It's really cool that it's coming together. The Board Game Guine's Mnemonic Tavern. These are some of the latest screenshots. They've been doing a whole lot of work on this game. If you want to, this is a cyberpunk RPG that I am the content director on. It is inside of the same world as Neofeud 2 as well. And if you want to follow this game, it is on Twitter at Terminus C, and you can check it out on Discord, in the Discord there as well. Don't forget, of course, to follow our brother here at Silverspook Cooperative, Positive Synergy, who is a Native Hawaiian educator as well, and is a musician making music related to and dealing with everything I'm talking about from an indigenous perspective. And the album is called Perfecting Perfection. Very good album. The music is great. The message is on point and important. Dealing with land back, stopping colonizers, oppressors, and capitalism from destroying us. It's very important music. Do check it out. Do support Positive Synergy in Positive Synergy's independent business that he's trying to get off the ground as we speak, to provide for material conditions. Help Positive Synergy provide for his own material conditions. His housing, his electricity, his food, his car, and everything else that he needs by picking up the album. You're giving material support to Native Hawaiian when you do that. Also, you can follow Holly Argent at the Tech Fairy, mod and VA partner for Silverspoon Guy, myself, producer and writer for Goblin Mother, and Magic Story Time. Holly is also, primary caregiver to two keiki children in Hawaii, constantly doing lots of really cool work and very important work, and writing books. One of them is a book called Woman, an Irreverent Retelling of the Life of Mary, published in December 2021. Do check that out. It is from Holly, who was raised in a right-wing conservative Christian household in North America, and if you want to learn about, you want to have a dunking on a lot of that kind of stuff that it deserves, do check out this book. Anyway, I gotta go. So thanks very much. Until next time, keep in your stage polish, be excellent to each other. Don't forget to I'm gonna come back, I think, on this channel, and then we're gonna have another stream. So that's why I gotta leave real fast. We'll be talking to Professor Flowers, also known as Lua, about Red Deal and more topics. And I'll probably be asking Professor Flower some questions about Professor Flower herself. All right, everybody.